Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
For over 35 years, Corporate Direct has been helping entrepreneurs and investors protect their assets and build real wealth. Founded by Garrett Sutton, a best-selling author and advisor to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad team, Corporate Direct provides professional asset protection, high-quality incorporation services, and strategic advice for real estate and investments. Corporate Direct also assists clients in meeting compliance requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act, ensuring federal reporting is handled with ease and accuracy. Anyone ready to start a business or protect their investments can call 1-800-600-1760 for a free 15-minute consultation or visit corporatedirect.com to learn more. Remember, call 1-800-600-1760. Corporate Direct, your trusted partner in business success. Welcome to Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. On this podcast, we share stories, strategies, and tools to help you achieve financial freedom and live a life you love. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome an extraordinary guest, Doug Nordman. Doug served for 20 years in the U.S. Navy's submarine force and retired at just 41 years old. Along with his spouse, a retired Navy reservist, Doug reached financial independence in 1999, thanks to a high savings rate. Doug's journey to financial freedom is both inspiring and practical. He's the author of The Military Guide to Financial Independence and Retirement and co-author of Raising Your Money-Savvy Family for Next Generation Financial Independence. I can't wait to dive into the story, and if you're a military veteran or active military personnel, make sure you listen to the whole episode. Let's get to it. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Disha. It was good to meet you at FinCon. I'm glad to come back for a guest appearance.
Yes, I was so excited to talk to you. My family has veteran in it, and you have so many insights when it comes to military finance and then also just finance in general. So I can't wait to dive into your story. So Doug, can you start with telling us a little bit about your story? Can you share how you and your spouse achieved financial independence at such a young age?
Well, we were dual active duty military couple for most of our careers in the 80s and 90s. And I was on sea duty for two different submarines at the time. So most of it comes from a high savings rate. And in our case, the high savings rate meant we had no spare time. We were either on sea duty or we started a family in the early 90s. And of course, as parents, we ran out of time pretty quickly there. When you don't have a lot of time to do other stuff, to waste money, you tend to focus in on what's important to your lifestyle. And so we were naturally frugal from college and from the time we spent on active duty, underway or on watch or on duty. And from that, you realize that you can spend your money where you find the most value in it. And essentially, you're saving one paycheck. We were perpetually thinking about getting out of active duty. And because of that, we were always trying to save up money for a transition fund. And as we ramped up our savings rate, once we had the basics covered for housing and for an emergency fund, things like that, then we started ramping up the savings rate for the transition fund and later on investing and going into a 401k. The military version is called the Thrift Savings Plan. Also investing in our IRAs. As we did that, and as we compounded and as everything grew, we reached financial independence by the 4% safe withdrawal rate definition, 25 times assets of your annual expenses. So when we reached that in 1999, the joke is that everybody reached financial independence at the height of the internet bull market for about 15 minutes, but we stayed on active duty. One of the reasons I stayed on active duty was because at that point I was at 17 years of active duty, only 3 years away from a pension. Another reason we stayed on active duty is that none of us had done the research to realize what a good deal it could be to leave active duty for the reserves. And we kind of overshot the mark there on financial independence by me staying on active duty until we got our pension. But again, having that pension is a wonderful sense of security, and it's nice to have the inflation adjusted income stream for the rest of my life.
So, what is it about the reserve duty that's so advantageous?
Most of it is an improvement in a quality of life. Instead of being on active duty 24/7, 365, the joke about being in the reserves or the National Guard is that you're 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. Those of you who are reservists and guard members right now are laughing at that because that doesn't always work out that way, but that's the advertising.
Hmm.
The nice thing about going into the reserves or guard is that you have a better quality of life because you're not working full time on active duty. You also have a lot of the benefits of the military from being in a drill billet where you are working that weekend a month or that 2 weeks a year. You have less of the sucky parts. There's still some suck, but there's less of the sucky parts. Instead of getting an active duty pension the day after you retire, maybe in your late 30s or early 40s or later 40s, instead of that immediate active duty pension, instead you get a reserve pension that starts at age 60 for most people. What that means to military families who are already saving for financial independence is that now you have a little buffer on your savings for financial independence. You really only, instead of having to save money for 30 years or more, are able to save until you bridge the gap from whenever you leave active duty in the reserves, the gap until you hit age 60 and start your pension. And so it's like having Social Security start much earlier for you and you're at age 60 for the reserve pension. You still get Social Security later on in your 60s or at age 70. It makes the finances easier. It's hard to find out about the reserves while you're on active duty. It's just not something that's important to the active duty community. And finding out about the reserves implies that you're thinking of getting out and not being a career oriented active duty service member. So it is a little difficult to figure out what goes on in the reserves. I also did not appreciate the benefits of the pension. And I talk about that a lot with military families about having a pension at age 60 instead of immediately. It's almost as advantageous, especially if you're already saving for financial independence. Maybe leaving active duty at 10 or 12 years, you'll reach financial independence about the same time with the drill weekends and a civilian career.
Yes. So, a lot of people actually don't appreciate that. And I think you're right about that. I mean, it sounds like military service in general is very, very difficult. So thank you for doing that. And I can appreciate how hard it is from a spouse's perspective. But the thing is, on paper, you're not making that much. However, there's so much tax-free pay,
Exactly.
right? You get housing, you get a stipend when you deploy, you get food stipends, I guess, but you get a living allowance, right? So a lot of it is not taxed, and that's huge. And then you get this pension, and then you can also save into the thrift savings plan and an
Right.
IRA. I mean, for a FI, this sounds like an ideal situation. You're not in a high tax bracket and you get to put a lot of money away. So it sounds like you really took advantage of that. And thank you for educating us on the benefits of the reserves and how advantageous that can be. But Army life in general is not like it's not a glamorous life by any means, right?
There has to be a catch.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's a pretty frugal life when you're in service, but you wrote an insightful article called Frugal Living is Not Deprivation. Can you explain how living on less can help us live a richer life?
I get that question a lot because the financial independence community, from the outside looking in, the financial media assumes that we're all living lives of deprivation. We must be dumpster diving for food and recycling our toilet paper. And of course, those of us who are saving for financial independence know that's not the case. We're just lining up our spending with our values. And one of our values is reaching financial independence and having a better quality of life. But you're going to have fun along the way.
Right.
And part of that involves a high savings rate. The faster you save more money, the faster you get to financial independence. However, you also have things that you want to do and enjoy while you're younger and still able to travel and still chase after young kids, whatever your priorities are. So we talk about the way it feels because financially you can sit there and look at the numbers and figure out a way to reach financial independence in 5 years. However, you're probably living like a monk or a submariner. On the other hand, if you back off to a 10% savings rate, you will be working for 30 or 40 years, well into your 50s before you reach financial independence. So you have to find the sweet spot on saving and frugality, the difference is actually feelings. When you're frugal, you feel like you're challenged and fulfilled and you're going for financial independence and you're winning. That's what frugality feels like, winning. On the other hand, there's deprivation, and deprivation has a purpose. There are times in your life when you're going to be paying off student loans or helping family out in an emergency or doing something else that requires you to save an extraordinary amount of money and deprive yourself of things that you would prefer to spend your money on. Instead, deprivation is good when it gets going because you are reaching a goal, but we all know it's also unsustainable. You can have deprivation for student loans. You can have deprivation if you want to pay off a mortgage. You can have deprivation in an emergency with family. But again, you're probably not going to enjoy a challenging and fulfilling life when you're living with deprivation. If there's anything good about deprivation for military families, it's that they've spent so much time in it that they know exactly where the line is between frugality and deprivation.
Hmm.
And they know right away when they've crossed the line. So the advice
That's
is that you raise your savings rate as high as you can, and as long as you're feeling challenged and fulfilled, and you feel like you're winning, you're doing a good job. You're frugal, but if you feel like you're missing out or saving too hard, that's when you back off a little bit, and not a lot, but you back off the savings rate a little bit until you're doing the things you enjoy in life while you're still able to do them. And I can personally attest to don't save lots of slow travel for old age. Do these things while you're younger and more mobile.
right. Yeah, and that's the hardest part, is finding that sweet spot and the balance between frugality and deprivation. And I like how you put that. Frugality feels like you're winning, and that's exactly what it is. You are aligning your values with the way you're spending your money and putting your money at what you enjoy. And so, of course, it feels like winning. But yeah, when it starts to feel like deprivation, that's the line where you need to step back. Like that a lot. So many of our listeners are busy professionals balancing demanding careers and financial goals. What advice would you give someone who's just starting their journey on financial independence and trying to figure out how to be frugal and save money while, working a ton?
There are a lot of social media groups, mostly on Facebook, for people who are catching up to FI, catching up to the idea that they want to reach financial independence and not work until their 60s. It'd be great if you started saving in your Roth IRA as a teenager and let that compound for 50 years, but we all know that that's unusual. So the advice is the same. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how much you have. It matters where you are when you start. Maybe the best time to start would have been 20 years ago, but the second best time to start is today. And when you do that, the first thing that I suggest people do is figure out where the money is going. The way to do that is to track your spending. Immediately, it sounds like a New Year's resolution. You're going to go on a diet, you're going to go to the gym for 2 hours every day, you're going to lose 30 pounds before February. That's not what I have in mind. What I recommend is just tracking your spending. No judging, no deprivation. Just figure out where the money goes by tracking it, however works for you. Whether it's an app on your phone or paper and pencil and anything in between, you're tracking your spending to get the data you're going to need to make decisions later on. And after 3 or 4 months of that, the second step is to look at what you've spent and figure out what you're wasting your money on. And again, I'm not the person to judge on that. You're the person to judge where you're wasting your money. And so you look back on that and figure out, well, maybe going out every Friday night for drinks and dinner isn't what I had in mind. We'll cut back on that. Maybe it's something else that you're wasting money on, like a car that has a high payment or some other aspect of your life that you really had not paid attention to until your values evolved and now you're willing to start saving for financial independence. So the second step there looks at where you're wasting the money and you just try to do less of that. Again, you're being more frugal than you previously were. You probably feel more challenged and more fulfilled, and maybe you feel more like you're winning, especially when your checking account balance starts to go up as that money piles up. And the third step is to start investing all that excess cash into passively managed index funds with low expense ratios and having an asset allocation that will get you to financial independence in a sustainable manner. So those are 3 steps. Now, sounds pretty simple. I mean, I've answered this question about a million times by now, but it's straightforward and yet still challenging. You still have to focus on your goals and make choices. And sometimes you overstep the bound into frugality and deprivation. And other times you back off and maybe you're not going to have that savings rate for that month or two while you do something else with your life. The point is that it is a marathon. You're going to have times when you're sprinting in there, and you're going to have other times when you're walking during that marathon, but you're going to proceed toward that goal consistently.
I love that. And, incidentally, this episode is going to air close to New Year's. So if this is your resolution, that's okay.
Yeah.
The hardest part is getting started tracking that spending, because the scariest part is opening up our accounts and trying to make sense of where all the money is going and what all you spent money on, and looking it in the face and in the eye, right? So this is your reminder. Do that first step, and then the subsequent steps are even more possible and much, much easier. So that's the hardest thing. Tracking the spending is the hardest thing, but you've got this. You got a free Excel sheet that I have on my website, The Frugal Physician,
there you go.
that you can download and just use as a rubric to fill in your spending categories. Just figure out where the money's going. Don't have to judge. 2 to 3 months. At the end of 3 months, that's when you judge. And that's exactly what I teach everyone too, Doug. Totally 100% agree with everything you just said. Now, you've co-authored a book with your daughter, Carol, about raising money-savvy kids. So I really want to hear about your top tips for teaching children about financial independence. And she co-wrote this book with you, so she must have learned some very good lessons.
We talk about co-writing a book, but what really happened was I knew how to edit and publish, and she was writing a lot faster than I was keeping up. So essentially, I was chasing to catch up with everything she was doing. The book almost wrote itself. She had opinions. When you're a parent and you're trying to inspire your kids to save money and achieve a goal, kids think that parents are basically crazy. And the reason that kids think parents are crazy is because when a kid gets $20 from grandma as a 5 or a 6-year-old, their parents come in and say, well, we want you to save 1/3 of this, and we want you to put some money in a college fund, and we want you to send some money to charity, and oh, here's a little bit of money to spend on a toy. And that's not a kid's priority. I mean, college is 2 lifetimes away for most kids at that age, and the last thing they want to do is go to more school. They can't get much money anyway, and giving it away doesn't seem to make much sense. And so, from a kid's perspective, at age 5, 6, 7, 8, the only rational thing to do as soon as you get money is to spend it as quickly as possible before the fiscal authorities confiscate it from you and make you put it away somewhere. And so, kids, when they're younger, there's an author, another personal finance author, David Owen. His book, The First National Bank of Dad, talks about how to visualize your kids' decision skills at that age. And he says you have to get used to the kids wasting money at a young age when it's just a little bit of money. And by that, he has an analogy of giving your kids a $20 bill only to watch them light it on fire and then run around the backyard waving it like a 4th of July sparkler. That's what kids do at that age. But the whole point of giving kids money at that age is teaching them to manage the money, mostly by making bad choices, but they learn to make choices on the money. And every time a choice goes by, you have a chance for a teachable moment and a discussion about how they wanted to spend their money. And again, it's no judging, hey, you wasted your money on this thing and don't do it again. No, it's about, well, when you spent that money, what did you think was going to happen? How did you feel? What do your friends think? Did that toy work out the way you expected? If you were going to do this all over again, what would you do differently? And even a 5-year-old can kind of articulate what they would do differently the next time. And you just keep having these teachable moments and these discussions while they're making these bad decisions. Now, some kids will immediately get it. Some kids are born savers. They want to have those resources. They will easily save for a goal because it's important to them. Other kids want to enjoy life, and they see saving as deprivation. So you have to work with what the child's tendencies are. And they eventually, after they make a number of choices and mistakes with managing their money, they're ready to start learning how to save their money or earning it. That second step, it's different for every kid. So we talk about elementary school, roughly. Some are slower than others, some are faster than others. But roughly in elementary school, you can start giving them financial incentives. Now, as a grown-up, as a submariner, I responded very well to financial incentives. Whenever the Navy dangled a few dollars in front of me, I would be chasing after that like a starving donkey while the carrot was out in front of me, and I didn't have to worry much about the stick to keep me moving. So if you can give your kids financial incentives, they will eventually realize that they're saving money almost effortlessly, and they can save for a bigger goal. So one example of a financial incentive is if you take a healthy home lunch to school instead of buying the school lunch, then you get to keep half of the money you save for the family. That way the kid gets to go eat their favorite Friday lunch if that's what they want. But if they want to take school lunch the other 4 days a week, well, maybe they'll save 10 or 15 bucks a week, whatever school lunch costs. But the money that they're saving starts to pile up pretty soon. And there are other incentives, and we talk about those in the book, but that's an example of an incentive for somebody who's 6 or 7 or 8 years old. You also can introduce the concept of allowances, chores, and jobs. And every family has their own rules. We don't specifically have a set of rules for that. But if you're giving an allowance to a child, that gives them the chance to make choices with their money.
Yeah.
If they have chores to do, that's keeping the family house to be a nice, safe place to live. It's something you do to be a good member of the family. We never explained to our daughter what being a good member of the family meant for allowances or chores. We got away with that for like 18 years until she got close to an adult relationship herself and realized that she'd never understood what that was. The jobs part is something that you do when you want more than your allowance. Jobs are optional. And it's also after chores. If you're not going to do your chores, you don't get to go have a job. But jobs are something that you would love to offload from your perspective, have the kid wash your car or help do the yard work or clean the house and something else that they don't normally have a chore to clean. And jobs are just an additional revenue option for them. You've got some allowance, you can save your allowance. If you want to save money faster, well, here's all these jobs that need done. And if you want to do those, that'd be great. That'll help the family. And you get to your goal faster. The whole theme here is wasting money early to learn how to start saving money on your own incentives. Those are the financial incentives, and making smaller mistakes when you're younger with smaller amounts of money so that wasting 20 bucks as a 6 or 7-year-old kid avoids wasting 200 or 300 bucks as a teenager. It avoids wasting a couple $1,000s in college or making a 5-figure mistake when you sign up for your first 401k. And someday, from the parental perspective, that child you're raising, lighting that $20 bill on fire and running around in the backyard with it, is going to be managing your money when you're an elder and maybe not so on the ball with cognition and managing your own personal finances. So you really want to have your offspring be confident with managing the large amounts of money you're going to have as a financially independent elder so that they can take care of your finances for you without you having to worry about it.
That's a great perspective because absolutely we see that happen in every family.
Right?
We're all going to age at some point and we're not going to have our faculties about ourselves at some point. At some point, our kids are going to manage our money. So this is like any other, job in parenting that you have to teach them. And a lot of us, especially in Asian families, are basically told, we'll take care of it all. You just focus on your studies. And then when you make a lot of money, it'll all take care of itself. Well, that doesn't happen in real life. And if you don't know how to manage that money as a child or not introduced to that concept, then it's tough to learn it on your own. And the mistakes you make are with 6-figure amounts, 5-figure amounts. And that's a huge mistake to make and feels a whole lot worse than that $20 bill as a child. So yeah, I think that's a great breakdown. Thank you so much for sharing that. And make sure to check out Doug's book if you really want to dive deeper into this.
Go to the library for the book. Check the book out at the library. Try it before you buy it, and then think about buying it.
Love it. Thank you, Doug. So in your millionaire interview with ESI Money, you sent that over to me. And I thought this was really interesting. You actually made some investment mistakes initially that you then changed. Please tell me about how you started investing and then how you evolved over time.
We started our careers in the Navy in 1982 and 1983 and reached financial independence about 17 years later. And back in the 80s, I have an entire blog post on what things were like back then with inflation and stock markets. And in retrospect, from today's perspective, it seems like anybody who had anything in a stock market in 1982 automatically made a lot of money. So when you're investing in 1982, we were paying sales charges of 2 to 3% on every check we sent into the investment company. And there were expense ratios. 1% was considered a reasonable expense ratio back then, and we would pay up to 1.5% expense ratios on the popular funds. And that was another mistake, was the popular funds. We were chasing the big funds, the popular managers, the hot performance. We made all those active investing mistakes. Back then, Vanguard had some index funds. We'd heard of Vanguard, but they had a lot of restrictions on how you could invest. And they had their own penalties. If you moved your money around too fast, your own money. they would charge you a penalty on that. And that just seemed like ridiculous. We would much rather go with something with Fidelity, with Peter Lynch and those other movers and shakers who are making a lot of money for us. Well, hopefully.
Here's a question. What's the true cost of not having a plan for your finances? With Facet, you don't have to leave that to chance. With their flat fee membership model, Facet is building the future of financial planning. You'll get access to a team of certified financial planner professionals and guidance across tax planning, estate planning, and more. No commissions, no hidden costs, just expert advice that evolves with you. Take the next step in securing your financial future and check out which membership option is right for you. Visit facet.com/frugalphysician today. That's facet.com/frugalphysician.
So during the 80s, we continued that process with actively managed mutual funds, and in the 90s as well. When I retired and from active duty in 2002, we were in the middle of the internet recession. That's also when we began to realize that exchange-traded funds had much lower expense ratios, and exchange-traded funds were largely index funds. So we were reducing our expense ratios from 1.5% down to 0.4% or 0.25%. And 0.25% seemed like a big deal at the time, a great big deal improvement, and it really was. And so we started investing in exchange-traded funds, index funds. We kept that up for another 10, 12 years. It wasn't until 2017, just 7 years ago, that we realized that we had been in exchange-traded funds and we'd done well and everything had compounded. We'd gotten through the Great Recession. Everything was working out well. Asset allocation had saved the day. But we did our expense ratios again and realized that expense ratios of 0.25 or 0.4% were now higher than most of the funds out there, especially a big Vanguard index fund like the Total Stock Market Index Fund. And so once we did the math, we realized that if we went from our exchange-traded funds that were index sectors into just a total stock market index fund, that would give us an extra month of travel every year for the rest of our lives.
Wow.
Just from the lower expense ratios, right? That's what the math does for you, is it makes you realize how your life choices might turn out a little differently from then on.
Yeah.
So having done that, we were tax efficient about it. I mean, the next day when we made this understanding, we moved our Roth IRAs into a total stock market index fund right away to reduce those expenses. And then over the last few years, we moved gradually from our taxable fund into the total stock market index fund out of those higher expense ETFs. It seems in retrospect like we wasted a tremendous amount of money, probably because we did. And that was mostly the opportunity cost of not being in an index fund with low expense ratios. On the other hand, when you have a high savings rate, which was our main goal for reaching financial independence, our main mechanism, a high savings rate will overcome a lot of stupid investing mistakes. That's the main lesson to learn there. You don't want to beat yourself up for every mistake you make with your expenses or with your income. But once you achieve a high savings rate and that's sustainable and you feel like you're doing well, then that quickly overcomes other errors you may make on the side.
And the big point here is that you were able to reverse course when you decided to change funds, and you were able to do that, especially in your tax protected accounts, and then, slowly in your brokerage account. But the important thing is that you put that money in to your investments and let it grow over time. Sure, you might have paid a little bit extra fees, but I am sure you made plenty of money anyway on the growth of the investments. And, you were able to retire at such an early age. And this is just a reminder to everyone that don't let the fear of making a mistake keep you back. You can fix a lot of mistakes, and oftentimes not really a mistake. Maybe you just paid a little bit more than you should have. And that's really all it is. And you can fix that at any time. So get started. That's the important part. Now, I want to ask you about your donation strategy, because I thought it was really interesting. So please tell us about that, the giving part of your financial strategy.
First, when I wrote my first book, we looked at the way that we wrote it, and we had a lot of help, a lot of crowdsourcing advice, and people volunteered for interviews. And part of motivating people to help write the book, my first book, The Military Guide, was if you contribute to the book in some way, then you'll get a vote on where we send the royalties. And so we send all the royalties, all the income from the Military Guide to military-friendly charities.
Nice.
It worked out very well. It's been out since 2011. So 13 years later, it's a total of $30,000 and still going up.
Nice.
When we started doing that, you go through the mechanics of donating to charity. And for me, it was putting the royalty check into a donor advised fund with Fidelity and then sending it out to the charities. And as we did that, we started thinking about our own philanthropy, our own personal charity in our family. And one of the things that happens when you're financially independent, if you start withdrawing your assets at the 4% safe withdrawal rate, as you go through the next 10 or 15 years, eventually the 4% safe withdrawal rate assumes that you're going to raise your spending with inflation. The reality is hardly anybody raises their spending in financial independence. Instead, what most people do is their spending crawls up gradually at less than inflation as people dial in their lifestyle. Meanwhile, if you've got an aggressive asset allocation with your investments, they're going to grow faster than inflation, maybe a lot faster. After about 10 or 15 years of this, when you look back, you started withdrawing 4% of your assets every year and raising that with inflation. That's the 4% safe withdrawal rate. But after 10 or 15 years, your assets have grown like this while your spending has only grown like that. And so we realized that our latest withdrawal rate, 10 or 15 years into it, was only 3%. And we've held steady with that. It's even gone down a little bit since then, depending on what our travel looks like for that year. But when you have that 3% versus the 4% safe withdrawal rate is already the worst case of the last century of investing. And so we didn't need that additional margin. We didn't need to worry about making our money last for a century. We knew that we could take that at 1% difference, that 1 percentage point between 3% and 4%, and give that to charity. And so that's what we do. Now we look at our net worth every year, usually around October or November, and we give 1% of our net worth to charity. And we've read all the books and looked at all the theories and all the philosophies of giving to philanthropy. Our personal choice was to give locally to our Hawaii Food Bank. They've done a lot of good work, especially during the pandemic, and I'm impressed with the operation they run there. But there's thousands of other places to give money to philanthropy for the goals that you have that you want to support, and they're all probably good enough. That's just our personal choice, and there's many more out there. It did take us about 10 years of experimenting with investing or donating to other charitable organizations before we really felt like we could focus in on the Hawaii Food Bank. We feel that's sustainable. We plan to continue that for the rest of our lives. There's a saying about giving with a warm hand, and we would rather give money to charity and help support those causes and see how they do with our money while we're all around to watch it together and make other choices. I don't see any reason to continue to watch our money compound until it piles up to something like $10 million 30 or 40 years from now, I hope. And then suddenly a bunch of money gets dumped on some charitable organization that we never really knew much about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a nice thought. And in the same vein, you're actually giving your daughter money as well, kind of giving her
Oh,
her
yeah.
inheritance ahead of time. So tell me about that and how you're doing that.
Well, again, this is all about teaching your progeny, your young adults, how to manage money and how to manage progressively larger sums of money, because one day they might be doing it for you. So, what part of the profit sharing incentive as she was older was the stewardship of the college fund. And she knew she had a college fund, and she knew that if she did a good job during her time at college of not wasting the college fund, there
Mhm.
would be profit sharing. And when she graduated, that started as gifting. And so with our first gift she got, we pointed out, hey, this is the amount that we can gift under the annual federal exclusion rules.
Mhm.
Here's $28,000. You say that in a Dr. Evil voice. That $28,000 is enough to make your 401k contribution. It's enough to maximize your Roth IRA contribution. It's enough to give you that first security deposit on your apartment lease. And by the way, to build an emergency fund so that first apartment doesn't have to be in a war zone. And
Mhm.
so that basically gives them a good launch in life from college. And she had a job waiting for her. She was in Navy ROTC in college. And so she commissioned right into active duty.
Nice.
The other, well, she thought it was a lot of fun, a good deal of time, and now she's much more experienced. She's also a Navy reservist, and then she eventually left the Navy, but she is married to an active duty spouse. He's got, 10 and a half years of active duty. So we're having that reserve and guard discussion all over again between our generations.
Mm.
The gifting, though, is intended to help them feel comfortable with managing larger sums of money. And it's their inheritance. Instead of waiting for their 60s or 70s to get it from us elders, they're getting it now while we're all still around to talk about it. And by talking about it, I mean, every year we get ready to hand over the money. And in fact, in January, we're going to hand over the gifts for 2025. And we have the same discussion every year. Are you feeling like your personal growth is being stunted? Do you feel like you suffer from affluenza? Are you worried about managing these? Well, that's pretty much the reaction I get from Carol, too, is she starts to laugh about it. And her spouse feels the same way.
I love that term, affluenza.
Well, it's been out. There's a documentary from the 90s that talks about overconsumption and hyperconsumerism, and it has a lot of good points. But again, that's the purpose of the conversation, is to bring up these vocabulary terms and say, well, go watch the documentary and see how you feel. And we wanted to do this while we are all still around to talk about it. Statistics indicate that baby boomers are turning over their assets to the next generation when that next generation is already in their 50s or 60s, and some of them are in their 70s. And to us, this makes no sense. You need that money for some special purpose or some goal. If you had to wait half your life or 3/4 of your life for your inheritance, or if you could be a steward of it earlier, say in your 20s or 30s, responsible, training wheels, smaller amounts, maybe that makes sense. And when we gave that first gift to our daughter, we did point out that if a hot Mustang or a pickup truck showed up in her driveway next week, that we might back off on the gifting a little bit and see how things worked out. But by then it was clear to us that she was already at least as frugal as we were at that age, much more than I was. But she was also going to have a much higher savings rate, and that did work out. They're in their early 30s, and they have just reached their financial independence.
Wow.
So at this point, we plan to continue the gifting as much as we can. It's interesting now that we've been doing this gifting for a while. Our 5-year-old granddaughter has a 529 that's probably going to support her through 4 years of college just by the compounding over the next 15 years. And the other savings that she's got, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act or Uniform Gifting to Minors Act, a UTMA trust, that could compound hypothetically enough that when she graduates from high school, that she could declare her financial independence. That's the hypothesis.
Wow.
We are having a lot of conversations with her, age-appropriate conversations with a 5-year-old about financial independence. And maybe we're not going to gift that much money to her to do that kind of thing when she's only 17 or 18 years old. I know what I would have done with that money at that age. So we do have a challenge ahead of us to see if this works in the third generation. But I still firmly believe that the biggest thing we've done as parents is make sure that our progeny, our daughter and our son-in-law, are able to handle higher and bigger sums of money without stressing over it. And if they do end up caring for my spouse and myself later on in life, I know personally caregiver stress is already bad enough without problems with finances or feeling uncomfortable with managing the large numbers of dollars that go flying out for long-term care. And so we want them to have the experience they need and the comfort they need to know, and to minimize the caregiver stress on them.
Speaking of long-term care, do you carry long-term care insurance, or does the military provide any kind of benefit for that?
No, and sort of. And let me clarify those. My father had a classic 1990s long-term care insurance policy. And when we finally made the claim, and when he went into early stage dementia, later on Alzheimer's, the insurance company immediately dismissed it and said, no, he doesn't meet the criteria. And so you can imagine you're a doctor, you know what families are going through to get somebody the insurance claim and the care they need.
Yep.
However, even for the next 3 years that they were paying out their long-term insurance claim, that company continued to subject families, as me being the financial conservator, to a tremendous amount of caregiver stress. Just the process by which you had to get reimbursed, and the lack of correspondence, the misunderstanding, it was horrible. And so my personal feeling is I don't want to put any more caregiver stress on my daughter or son-in-law. So long-term care insurance, even today's pricing of long-term care insurance, I still don't want to have that kind of caregiver stress. Instead, we are having enough assets in our name still that when we do get to a long-term care situation, we have enough money to pay for that. We have a rental property that hypothetically could be mortgaged or even sold if necessary. And we've been granting gifts every year to Carol and her spouse, and they've been building up their own net worth. So maybe they'd want to be able to handle the finances for us. I also look at the long-term care demographics. And the 90s, early 2000s, even up into 2010s, very expensive and very difficult, but there are actually fewer people in long-term care today and fewer showing up in long-term care than ever before. Families are doing a lot more home care. They're doing it at a much lower expense. They're doing it with care help. They're still paying for people to come in and help with the activities of daily living, but they're not spending it the tremendous sums before. Now, you asked about military long-term care insurance. There's a program called the Federal Long-Term Care Insurance Program, and it's focused at civil servants and military families and a couple other federal government people. It's a reasonable price. It's more than the premium my father paid in a 1990s policy, but we thought it was more sustainable. A little over 2 years ago, the only company remaining in that federal long-term care insurance program, John Hancock, suspended new applications. They shut the door on anybody who wanted to apply for long-term care insurance. And this was about 2.5 years ago. They said that they would reevaluate and give themselves a 2-year break, and they would come back after 2 years. They apparently are having difficulty interpreting the calendar, and maybe there's something else going on. It looks like it's going to be longer than 2 years. Meanwhile, the families in the federal long-term care insurance program, it has a process in there by which the insurance company can raise the premiums on the whole cohort whenever they deem it necessary. It's a little different from state long-term care insurance policies that are generally locked in at a certain price or for a fixed benefit. The federal program can raise the premiums or cut on the kind of care that they're going to offer. So you find families that bought long-term care insurance in their 50s and 60s. Now that they're in their 70s, the premiums over the years have doubled or even tripled, or the only other choice is to have fewer and fewer benefits from the program. And it's currently closed. And we can't even tell if it's ever coming back. Long-term care from John Hancock might be totally unsustainable.
That's terrible.
My advice to families is to either self-insure by becoming financially independent and being willing to have some longer end-of-life expenses. I'd also try to avoid the fear and uncertainty marketing of saying, oh, well, we're going to need $1 million for long-term care for everybody when you reach age 70. That's not the case. And I'd also suggest that maybe if you don't have a lot of financial independence, if you've been financially independent on low expenses and you have a low net worth, that you just think about a Medicaid spend down. You're going to possibly go into long-term care, have higher expenses. Maybe you'll approach Medicaid. If you're in a facility, they're still supposed to keep you there, even if you started as private pay and now you're on Medicaid. If you are at home care, well, you can still go on Medicaid. There are state and community resources for that. So it's possible to either self-insure with a higher net worth or plan to do a spend down for Medicaid if necessary. Again, people going into long-term care and institutionalizing, that is dropping precipitously, and even home care is starting to drop.
Yeah, and you can always put your assets in a trust too, and designate some trustees.
Medicaid trust. There's many legal maneuvers. Unfortunately, by the time families become aware of that, it might be a little too late. But if you're looking down the road and doing financial planning, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's move on to your life right now. You've retired and you have this idyllic life. So I want you to just please give us a look into your day-to-day life. What does it look like, and how do you find fulfillment in this phase of your life?
Well, we live on Oahu in Hawaii, and to everybody else who is not a surfer, this might seem silly, but this is a fact. I start every morning with the surf forecast. I usually go surfing 2 or 3 days a week, but if there's a tremendous swell coming in and we're going to have great waves for 4 or 5 days, well, it's a good thing I have my life arranged that I can take off and make sure I surf all those good waves while they're still out there. Nice. In fact, I would say that surfing forces you to be a little more organized than the rest of your life so that you can take the time off when those waves show up. But if I'm not going to go surfing that morning, I'll probably catch up on email, and then I start writing. Either I'm answering questions on social media, or I'm writing the next blog post, or I'm trying to figure out how to organize the blog posts that I've already written and published into book chapters, part of a book outline, whatever the next book is going to be about. Right now, my current project is editing and updating the military guide. It's 13 years. 80% of it is evergreen. The additional 20% is old numbers in the pay tables and a few new programs. So once that's updated, then I'm going to go start working on a third book about life after financial independence. I've got a bunch of other minor projects on my to-do list that I'd like to work on. The key to all of that is spending something like 20 minutes, half an hour a day working on something consistently. For me, that's in the early morning. When I can work on that, I feel like I can take the rest of the day off and have fun. After that, we've still got the usual chores, right? You still got the house to take care of, still got yard work to do. It's becoming apparent to me that if I'm not going to surf, then I probably should go walk on a treadmill or lift something heavy. Maybe that's yard work, but I do need to probably exercise some more. And I'm trying to figure out how to balance that with all the recovery time that takes. So right now, my daily routine includes a lunchtime nap, and I don't see that changing in the future.
That sounds fantastic.
Oh, yes. We're also grandparents. And I knew when I started our family back in the early 90s, we realized right away that changed all of our life priorities. We didn't see that coming when our daughter and her spouse started their family, that suddenly a granddaughter would turn all our priorities around all over again. And now I understand it. Now I get it. But yeah, be ready for that. And so when you have a granddaughter, then once again, you've got somebody to enjoy being around and watching them boot up their brain and become more active and turn into a little human. And I joke with my daughter that this time we're going to work harder and make sure we get it right. That still takes up some of our time. And so our granddaughter comes over now just about every weekday for an hour after preschool. And so it's playtime for whatever she wants to do. She's got things in the house to look at. She's got crafts she wants to do. She's got plenty of time with Grandmarge. That's the phase she's going right through right now, is wanting to spend all the time with Grandmarge instead of with Grand Doug. But when it's something physical, like playing on a treadmill or box sledding down the grass in our back slope, then I get called in for the physical labor parts.
Sure.
And after that, that's pretty much the end of the day. Now, I'm not on the internet working all day. I mean, I still have plenty of time to kick back with a book or work on some other project. And there is travel. That's become the big focus now, as we enjoy slow travel, but we are keenly aware of our diminishing stamina and our need for recovery days. So when we get back from a trip, there's a flurry of activity to catch up on all the things that were neglected at home while we were traveling. And then we start planning the next trip. And so we ideally would travel 3 to 4 months a year. This was a 1-month test absence on our granddaughter. It worked out fine. We missed her, but we still spent a month on travel. And she missed us, but she forgave us and she picked right up where she left off. So it's all going to work. And now we're thinking about taking a longer trip next spring and maybe a couple of months and see how that works out. That's in a category of slow travel while you still can.
I love it. Doug, thank you so much for sharing that piece of your life with us. What's your favorite surf spot in Hawaii? Are you surfing the big waves on the North Shore?
Well, I'm comfortable in 10 to 15 feet. I'm not willing to pay the penalty for trying to tackle a 20-foot wave, even though that comes along. If it's 10 to 15 feet, there's going to be a 20-footer eventually. So I go up to the North Shore whenever the South Shore is too flat and too windy. If I can go up the North Shore and get 10 to 15 feet, that's perfect.
Wow.
Otherwise, during most of the year, I spend my time down at White Plains Beach on the South Shore. So
Wow.
both places are wonderful to surf for different reasons, and of course, different crowds and different conditions.
Oh my God, those waves are so scary. 10 to 15 feet is still immensely scary to me. I'm so impressed by that.
There are things you can do to get better at it and feel less scared. But like I said, I don't surf 20-footers anymore.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out with us. Thank you so much for all of your time, all of your wisdom. And I feel like I could have another hour-long conversation with you and pick your brain, but I appreciate everything that you shared. And thank you again for your incredible story and your true inspiration and your practical advice. That's so invaluable to anyone that's seeking a financial freedom.
I'm glad to be here. And let me know if I can help with more questions.
Yeah. So Doug, one last question. How can our listeners find you?
I'm mostly on Facebook as Doug Nordman. You can also, I've got my email address out there on the internet, and I'll put it out here again. It's nords@gmail.com. I'm also moving from Twitter to Blue Sky. So if you're on Blue Sky, you'll see me showing up there more frequently. And for professional questions, career questions, I have a big audience on LinkedIn as well.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might find it helpful. Make sure you visit Doug's website and check out his books. And as always, you can follow us on social media or visit thefrugalphysician.com for tips on achieving financial freedom. Until next time, I'm Dr. Disha Spath, and this is Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. Stay frugal, y'all.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.